Not every door that opens is meant to welcome those who walk in. Sometimes the light in a room only makes the shadows those waiting all along even more visible. Their first afternoon at Blake's Martial Arts Center wasn't an introduction for Jay and Malik Reed, two black twin brothers who had just turned 15. It was a warning wrapped in the smiles of black belt holders and stares that didn't try to hide their contempt. This dojo in the affluent Ridgeview neighborhood, where white families drove Teslas to pick up their children after practice, symbolized discipline and tradition. But it was also where Jay and Malik walked in with worn-out shoes, borrowed uniforms, and hearts carrying both anxiety and hope. They didn't know that this place already had an unwritten system, an underground order, and they had unknowingly stepped into its bottom rung. As soon as the door closed behind them, Cole Baker and Dylan Price looked at each other as if they had just spotted new targets to unleash their arrogance and prejudice. Both were black belts, tall and prized students of Coach Tanner Blake, the man who ran the dojo with a long-standing reputation and had spoken at conferences on martial ethics and character. But Jay and Malik would soon realize that in this place, martial ethics were not meant for kids like them, kids whose fathers weren't businessmen, whose mothers weren't lawyers, who weren't white, and who didn't have connections. Everything from the looks of the other students to the indifference of the coach said it all without needing a single racist word. When students were split into groups for basic drills during that first class, Jay and Malik were placed in the group led by Cole and Dylan. That wasn't a coincidence. It was a test, or rather a sinister initiation ritual. Accidental blows that hit harder than necessary. Snide comments like, "Wow, you guys learn fast. Must have picked it up on the streets, huh?" It happened right before Coach Blake, who stood just a few steps away, but whose eyes never landed where they should have. Every time Jay's stance faltered slightly, Dylan shoved his shoulder under the guise of adjusting it. Whenever Malik stepped back to dodge a strike, Cole sneered as if he had just proven weak. No one raised their voice, no one shouted, but every action was more explicit than an insult. When they got home that evening, Andre, their father, asked, "How was your first day?" Jay answered, "It was fine." Malik just nodded. They didn't mention the contempt in those stares. They didn't mention the blows that hurt more than necessary. They didn't talk about their loneliness in a crowded room that felt as cold as a desert, because they were used to it, used to staying silent to survive, used to not making things a big deal so they wouldn't be labeled too sensitive, used to holding tightly onto their dignity even when that hand was trembling with rage. But they didn't yet understand this silence does not stop those who look down on you. It invites them to keep pushing further. And what awaited them ahead was not just regular training. It was a prolonged war where their bodies would be trampled, their spirits tested, and their self-worth mocked. And in that darkness, something would begin to burn, not to seek acceptance, but to dismantle every broken order. The first bruise didn't show on the body, it was on the pride. It didn't appear as clearly as a purple mark on an arm, but it lingered quietly and persistently. Week 2 at Blake's Martial Arts Center began with repetitive drills entering the room, bowing, practicing the basics, and responding to commands. However, for Jay and Malik Reed, each class was a more refined version of humiliation. Cole Baker and Dylan Price no longer needed words to show their contempt. They used their eyes, half smiles, and even their standing too close, invading personal space to declare, "You don't belong here." Jay began to brace his shoulders in anticipation of being shoved. Malik learned to lean at just the right angle to reduce the impact of a coincidental kick. Both learned to press their lips shut, not out of fear, but out of fear that they might say something that would make it all worse. Their silence wasn't weakness. It was a form of patience passed down from their parents who understood that a wrong reaction in a system not built for them was the same as stepping out of the game. Coach Tanner Blake kept doing what he did best, ignoring it. During practice, he often passed hard contacts, which any experienced instructor would know had no training value. He always spoke of discipline, tradition, and respect. But not once did he pause when Jay collapsed from a kick to the stomach, or when Malik got up with bright red palms from blocking bare-handed. That's part of the process, he told another parent. No pressure, no diamonds. The problem is that diamonds don't have feelings. Jay and Malik did, and every time they stayed silent, those around them also learned something, that this could happen, and no one had to say a word. That night, when they came home limping slightly, Andre sat at the kitchen table studying a blueprint for the next day's job. How was practice? He asked, not lifting his eyes from the electrical diagram. Fine, Jay responded quickly, taking the seat across from him, trying not to breathe too hard. Malik just gave a slight shrug. Andre didn't look closely. Or maybe he had grown used to trusting his son's strength. He had once said, "Never blame the environment. If you want to survive, you have to be stronger than it." But sometimes the environment isn't a forest you pass through. It's a systemic storm where every path leads to a single question. Who do you think you are, even to stand here? Malik woke up in the middle of the night from the pain in his shoulder. Jay couldn't sleep either. The shared room of the two brothers was dimly lit by the streetlights streaming through the window. They both lay still, saying nothing. But in that silence, they still heard each other's twin often sense when the other is holding back something heavier than physical pain. Then came the third week when accidents turned into challenges. During a sparring drill, Cole kicked Jay straight in the knee, making him stagger. Then he sneered, "You move like you're doing hip-hop, not karate." A few students laughed. Malik jumped in to shield his brother, only to receive an elbow to the ribs from Dylan, along with the mocking line, "Nice block. Must have picked that up from your hood." Jay sat on the floor, sweat and humiliation mixing. He looked up at Coach Blake. The man was lecturing another group or pretending not to notice. For a brief moment, Jay wished his father were there. Not to fight anyone, to see, to know, to witness what he had always told Jay he'd have to overcome with grit. And then, one afternoon, it happened. By coincidence, Andre arrived earlier than usual, just in time to see Jay picking up his towel after being dropped by one of Dylan's unnecessary hooks. He saw the bruise on Malik's neck, Jay's bleeding lip, and more than anything, he saw the eyes of his sons. The eyes of warriors trying to survive a war he hadn't even known was happening. Andre said nothing. He didn't rush in with questions. He didn't yell. He just observed more closely than anyone else in that room. And when his sons got in the car, he asked only one question, slow and heavy as stone. "How long has it been?" Jay didn't answer. Malik stared out the window unblinking, and that silence after everything was the answer. Malik Reed wasn't a man who angered easily, not because he lacked fire inside, but because he had learned to control it like a soldier who had survived 2 battlefields. But the fury that came that day wasn't personal. It came from realizing that he had failed to see what he should have seen first, his children's pain. After practice, Andre didn't interrogate them. He didn't need to. Everything was already visible in the eyes of his 2 sons, the look of boys learning to endure alone. When Jay tried to hide his limping gait, when Malik didn't lean back into his chair like he always did, Andre knew this wasn't temporary. This was a trench war his sons had been fighting alone for weeks, armed only with silence. That night at dinner, Monica, his wife, was still working her hospital shift. The kitchen had only him and the two boys, all three eating without touching the topic. Andre looked at Malik's hands, the knuckles swollen. Jay was pushing food around his plate as if trying to write something he couldn't say aloud with his fork. Andre set down his chopsticks. Tonight, he said, we're starting a new training session in the garage. Jay looked up, slightly stunned. Malik blinked. Neither knew what that meant. But Andre didn't wait for questions. He got up, walked back, opened the garage door and flipped on the light. The old room was cluttered with tools, paint cans, and wires unrelated to martial arts. But within an hour, it became something else entirely. Andre pulled the pickup truck out to the street, cleared the floor, hung an old punching bag from the ceiling hook, and retrieved a pair of focus mittens, the same gear that had traveled with him through years of military training. Jay and Malik stood there, still in their home clothes, watching their father turn a repair shop into a sparring ground. There was something different in the air, not rage, but weight, a sense that something was beginning, something that couldn't be undone. We're not here to train for competition, Andre said, his voice low, sharp like a blade. We're here to train, not to get crushed, not to win medals, but to survive. Malik frowned. Are you going to teach us how to fight? Andre didn't answer right away. He slipped on the mittens and said calmly, I'm going to teach you how to defend yourselves. Not dojo style, but in the kind of way where, if someone grabs your collar in an alley without a camera, you walk out of it without needing anyone to save you. Jay clenched his fists, then relaxed them. And if someone asks, what do we say? Andre looked at his sons, his eyes stern but gentle. Say you're learning how to survive. Say you're learning to protect each other. The rest stays between us. And so the first session began. No ceremony, applause, or shouts. Just three men in an old garage and the steady rhythm of fists hitting leather, interrupted breathing, and determination forged from being underestimated. Andre didn't teach them to bow or stretch. He taught them how to break holds, how to use their shoulders to generate counterforce, how to weaponize surprise, to reverse a situation in a heartbeat. Don't hit to win, he said. Hit to end danger. Fast, clean, precise. Doesn't have to look good, it just has to end it. When the session ended, Jay was sweating, his arms slightly shaking. Malik, though exhausted, still held his stance. Andre looked at them as if he wasn't just seeing two 15-year-old boys, but stronger versions of them are slowly forming. Versions that wouldn't back down when pushed. Versions that could stand back up and keep moving on their own feet. How long are we going to train like this? Jay asked, wiping his face with the hem of his t-shirt. Andre answered with just one sentence, but it echoed through the garage like an oath. Until people are too afraid to lay a hand on you without fearing the consequences. No one knew, and no one questioned it. That was precisely what made it work. For nearly a month after that first session in the garage, Jay and Malik kept attending the dojo like ordinary students. They still bowed, still lined up, still picked up towels and wiped the mats after class. But if anyone paid close attention, they would notice something small. The two boys no longer felt the way they used to. Cole's kicks no longer made Jay stumble. Dylan's sneaky hooks no longer forced Malik into sudden dodges. And the brothers' eyes, the ones that used to look away, now didn't. They looked straight ahead, silent but sharp. At night, when the lights in the neighborhood went out, the garage at the Reed house stayed lit until almost midnight. Andre didn't train his sons with flashy moves. He taught them reflexes, situational awareness, how to read intentions through shoulders, feet, and even breath. He created the worst-case scenarios, being slammed to the floor, having their wrists grabbed, being cornered with no way out. Jay learned to use his small frame to redirect force. Malik learned to rotate his hips to break his opponent's momentum. They sweated on concrete floors, their chins scraping the ground, knees scraped and bleeding. But no one complained. No one quit, because inside them, each drop of sweat was a step reclaimed, preparing for a counter-strike no one would see coming. Don't let them see you changing, Andre reminded them after each session. Don't show off your strength. Real strength doesn't need applause. It only needs to show up at the right moment and for the right reason. At Blake's martial arts center coach, Blake still ignored them. Cole and Dylan continued their invisible tests. But something had shifted. During one sparring match, Jay made Cole slip with a sidestep that looked effortless. Malik blocked Dylan's spinning elbow with a tricky forearm fold, something he'd never reacted fast enough to do before. "You're learning fast," Cole said, half mocking, half nervous. Jay just smiled. "I'm just trying to catch up." The most terrifying thing for those who look down on others isn't open defiance. It's the realization that their victims no longer fear them and give no hint of what they'll do next. One evening after training, Andre lingered longer than usual. He handed each son a pair of wrist wraps and said, "This is the final lesson. Starting tomorrow, I won't train with you anymore." Jay panicked. Why? Andre gave a faint smile, but his eyes turned serious. "Because if you must rely on me, I've taught you wrong. Martial arts isn't so you can hide behind someone stronger. It's so you become the one who doesn't need to hide." Malik stayed quiet for a moment, then nodded slowly. Something shifted in his eyes, something only his father had carried before, the calm of someone who knows his strength and doesn't need to shout to prove it. From that day on, the garage lights went off early, but inside the boys the fire didn't go out. It was only waiting for the right moment to ignite. And that day would come sooner than anyone expected. Nothing changed, on the surface. But those who truly paid attention could feel something different. It was as if the training hall at Blake's martial arts center was filled with a silent pressure that grew heavier each day. Cole still strutted with arrogance. Dylan still sneered with his usual smirk. Coach Blake still taught like only the white kids in the front row deserved real techniques. But one thing was different: Jay and Malik no longer looked down. When his name was called for sparring, before Jay stepped forward with a faint smile, avoiding eye contact and lowering his chin. Now he looked straight ahead, not proud, not defiant, but calm and cold, like someone who had stood back up too many times to be shaken again. Malik, meanwhile, was so quiet it made opponents uneasy. His gaze didn't say anything specific, but it made one thing clear: if you strike, he will not yield and doesn't need anyone to protect him. Jay stepped back half a pace, tilted his shoulder, letting the kick glide past him, then countered with a shoulder press that knocked Cole off balance. No one saw exactly how he did it. All they saw was Cole stumbling forward, forced to twist his body to regain footing. The whole room froze. Jay didn't smile. He held his stance silent, waiting for the next round. Cole flushed with anger. "Where'd you learn that been sneaking lessons?" he hissed through clenched teeth. Jay still didn't respond, but his eyes, once evasive under bright lights, now cut through the noisy room like steel. The second round began. Cole attacked harder, his strikes heavier, and his frustration showed. But Jay, once mocked as the black kid with sloppy form, wasn't just blocking now. He was reading the moves. He dodged on cue, neutralized the power, and then countered with a perfectly timed low sweep that sent Cole crashing to the floor. The murmurs disappeared. Silence spread like a wave. Even Coach Blake, who had always found ways to ignore Jay's abilities, stepped forward. He didn't compliment, didn't speak, But for the first time, he didn't deny what had just happened. Cole got up, face flushed, red lips pressed tight. He was about to say something, but Jay bowed formally as if the match had ended before it even began. "We'll be holding a real tournament next month," Coach Blake said, trying to reassert authority. "Get ready. That's when the strong and the weak will show themselves." Jay returned to his seat. Malik patted him gently on the shoulder. No words were needed, because both of them knew this was only the prelude. Those who once looked down on them still hadn't realized the real fight hadn't even started. But when it did, they wouldn't be ready. The tournament day came faster than expected, and it was more intense than any previous test the dojo had ever held. Blake's Martial Arts Center hosted an expanded internal exchange, inviting 3 other dojos from the region to participate. Banners were hung on Monday. Match lists were posted in the main hall. The atmosphere in the dojo was heavy, like the air before a storm. Students who once slacked off now trained harder, not out of discipline, but because of the pressure of being exposed to hundreds of unfamiliar eyes. Jay and Malik didn't talk much that week. They still showed up early, still wiped the floors, still trained in the garage every night. But in their eyes, something had closed like a door, sealing off the power within. They no longer longed for recognition, no longer craved praise. They had one goal: to fight exactly as they had trained, with discipline, precision, and self-respect. No one could take away. The tournament took place in a local gymnasium. Spectators packed both sides of the bleachers. Guest instructors in GIS sat in solemn rows. The head judge was Master Kim, a veteran of hundreds of state-level tournaments, known for his strictness and refusal to show bias. Jay was called first. His first match was against a student from Morado Martial Arts, taller by a full head stocky, with a smug look in his eyes. When the referee shouted "Begin," the opponent charged with an aggressive combo. But Jay didn't back off. He rotated his hips, used his shoulder to redirect the momentum, and executed a sweep at just the right beat, causing his opponent to stumble. No one had expected a counterattack like that, least from the kid who had once been benched from every match. 30 seconds in the first point went to Jay. A minute later, a clean, sharp punch made the crowd gasp. The opponent staggered, forced to step back. Jay didn't smile, didn't cheer, he just stood there, breathing evenly. When the whistle blew to end the match, he bowed and stepped off the mat, as if he had just completed a routine drill, not just eliminated someone who once called him the glitch kid. Malik stepped up next. His match was against a student who had once taken second place at state, quick, precise, but overconfident. Malik didn't open with an attack. He waited for the first beat, blocked. Second beat, dodged. The third beat, he launched a reverse elbow strike with the exact precision they had drilled hundreds of times in the garage. The crowd went silent. Then the score lit up on the board. Malik was ahead. And so the brothers advanced round by round. No boasting, no excuses. Every strike was precise. Every recovery after a hit made the audience hold their breath. And those who had once mocked them from the back now stood and applauded, though no one had asked them to. Cole and Dylan stood off to the side, watching in silence. The mood had shifted. The mockery had vanished, in its place unease. They realized that the boys they once ridiculed had far surpassed what they'd imagined. In the semi-finals, Jay faced the fighter who had defeated Cole in the previous round. It was a tense technical match that demanded proper composure. But in the final seconds, Jay held his ground and delivered a sweeping kick that dropped his opponent just as the bell rang to signal the end. Here is the complete and uninterrupted English translation of the next section you provided. The entire audience rose to their feet. The referee raised Jay's hand. Jay lifted his head, not out of pride, but relief. At last, he no longer needed anyone to defend or excuse him. Talent, when forged through patience and willpower, would speak for itself. Malik stepped out from the opposite ring, victory in hand as well. The twins tapped hands lightly, no word spoken, but everyone knew the final would be between them, no one else in between, and nothing left to prove, except to themselves. No one had expected it, but no one objected either. When the scoreboard lit up teen final, Jay Reed versus Malik Reed, the whole room erupted, not out of surprise, but in acknowledgement. The two kids nobody had remembered by name had quietly taken down opponent after opponent, layer after layer of bias, to reach the most anticipated match of the day. Coach Blake looked uneasy. He could no longer ignore those two names. Even Master Kim, the head judge, gave a discreet nod. Not a nod to a winner, but to those who had earned the right to be here. Jay and Malik stepped onto the center mat. In the soft golden light over the gymnasium floor, the two black 15-year-old boys, once called the janitor's kids, the weaklings, now stood barefoot facing each other. No fear, no defense, just pure respect. They bowed deeper than usual. The whistle blew. No one attacked right away. The entire audience held their breath. Jay moved first, gliding to the side like a shadow. Malik pivoted, held his stance. Neither rushed in, because they knew each other too well. They had practiced these moves hundreds of times in the garage. One's attack was the other's reflex. But today, everything was real. No more brothers for the next few minutes. Only two fighters faced off with everything they had endured, learned, and overcome. Jay threw a sidekick, Malik blocked with his elbow and countered with a front knee. Jay dodged in time. Malik pressed in. Jay twisted out and countered from below. Their exchange was so quick that even the judges leaned forward to keep up. Sweat dripped. Breaths came heavy. But their eyes never broke contact. 1 minute passed, no points. 2 minutes, still no one backed down. The audience began to clap first, just a few, then the entire bleachers, not for who would win, but for the truth. The two boys, who had once been silent shadows, were now fighting like true warriors. In the 3rd minute, Jay suddenly shifted and launched a lightning-fast sweep. Malik slipped slightly, but caught himself with his hands. He rebounded, spun in with a knee strike and blocked with his right arm. Jay stepped back half a pace. The referee paused the match because time had run out. No one had been knocked down, no one had crumbled. But everyone in the audience, the coaches, even students from the other dojos, was on their feet applauding. The scores were close. The winner finally announced was Jay. But he didn't celebrate. He walked over and extended his hand to pull Malik up. Malik looked at him, then they hugged right there in the middle of the roaring applause. Not because one had won, but because both had reclaimed the most important thing, their worth. Among the crowd, some people were in tears, some sighed, but no one called them the weak ones anymore. In that moment, Jay and Malik taught the entire arena something no instructor ever could. Pride doesn't come from defeating others. It comes from overcoming your past and still holding on to your respect. The award ceremony ended with scattered applause. Jay and Malik stood at the edge of the mat, holding no trophy or medal. It was an invitational. No medals were awarded, but everyone knew who had been the most unforgettable that day. Coach Blake shook hands with the guest judges, wearing a forced smile. He said nothing about the Reed brothers, but how his eyes avoided theirs in the crowd said everything. Something had cracked in the system. He'd long upheld a quiet hierarchy where skill didn't always get rewarded, only those who fit the mold. And today, that system is no longer solid. The very next day, a new announcement was posted on the dojo bulletin board. Starting next week, Jay Reed and Malik Reed will lead the evening technical group for the teen class. No one believed it at first, but the notice had an official signature. Jay was stunned. Malik just looked at the paper in silence. No one knew exactly what had happened until Logan, the smallest kid in the class, shyly approached Jay during break and whispered, "My dad said." Cole asked to be removed from the assistant coach roster. Jay frowned. "Really?" And also, Logan lowered his voice. "I saw Dylan hand coach a letter. I think they did something. Don't know if it's 'cause they were scared of being replaced or felt bad about what happened." Jay didn't respond. He just looked at Malik and both understood not all apologies come through words. Some changes begin with awkward, slow action, but are more genuine than any spoken apology. Fewer than 10 students showed up on their first day leading the class. The room was so quiet that you could hear breathing. But Malik didn't look at the numbers. He signaled to begin. Jay stood opposite, demonstrating each basic technique with no flair or dramatic displays, just correct, steady, and precise. A week later, the number of students had doubled. By the third week, Cole unexpectedly walked into the evening session wearing his GI and standing at the end of the line. No one had asked him to come, and no one knew if he was there to train or observe. But Jay kept teaching as usual, no sarcastic glances, no subtle jabs. After class, as everyone left, Cole lingered. Malik was mopping the floor. Jay was packing his gloves. Neither asked anything, but Cole spoke up. "I don't know where to start, but thanks for not striking back." Jay turned calm. "We didn't come here to strike back at anyone." Malik added, "We came here to be better than yesterday. As for you guys, figure out what you want." Cole didn't say another word, but when he bowed his head even slightly, both brothers knew something had changed. Not everything. Not everyone would respect them. But one thing was no longer in doubt. Jay and Malik had stepped out from the shadows of being overlooked. They were now the new standard, not because someone declared it, but because they had built it themselves. Tuesday evening class began like usual, with the faint scent of old rubber and the familiar thud of kicking pads echoing around. Jay and Malik split the students into 2 smaller groups as they did every week. No one talked much. They just focused on movement, each punch, each spin, and every steady breath in a room with no music. Everything went as always until the room's back door swung open. A middle-aged man in a charcoal shirt wearing glasses walked in with Coach Blake. He wasn't in a GI. His face showed no expression, only sharp, observant eyes scanning each movement like a silent judge evaluating an unannounced exam. Jay didn't pay much attention to it, but Malik did. He noticed Coach Blake didn't step into the room as usual. Instead, he stood right at the edge of the mat arms, crossed eyes fixed and unblinking. The man observed the training session for 15 minutes. He didn't say a word or greet anyone, but the man nodded slightly when Jay executed a complex counter-sequence, a hip pivot, and a sweeping kick, landing seamlessly without breaking rhythm. After the session, as the students slowly filtered out, Coach Blake called the twins over. "Someone wants to meet you two," he said, his tone unfamiliar. "He's from the State Martial Arts Academy, the Special Gifted Scholarship Program." The man stepped forward and shook both their hands. "My name is Dr. Carter. I teach and oversee admissions for the Southern Regional Inter-School Martial Arts Program. I attended the invitational event last week, and some clips of your performance were circulated among the schools in our network." He paused, looking at Malik, then Jay. "I don't say this often, but you two don't just have talent. You have the resilience that some people train a lifetime and still never reach." Jay said nothing, and Malik didn't either, not out of arrogance, but because no one had ever spoken to them like that before. Dr. Carter opened his briefcase and took out 2 envelopes. These are invitations to a special qualification test at the state center. If you pass, you'll receive full sponsorship tuition, living expenses, uniforms, and a chance to compete nationally. Jay almost couldn't believe his ears. The tiny garage, the torn sandbags, the tape-wrapped resistance ropes, all the things that had once been barriers now seemed like stepping stones to a world they had only seen on old YouTube videos. Dr. Carter left quickly, making no promises. He just left them with one sentence before getting into his car. "We're not looking for perfection. We're looking for those who've overcome the unexpected and are still standing." Jay looked at Malik. Malik looked back. No words exchanged, but both of them knew this wasn't a miracle. It was the result of every bruise, every flaw they had mopped, every fall and every rise. And now they were no longer just kids training in the shadows. They were candidates in a program where at last the light had found its way to the ones who truly deserved it. That Sunday afternoon, the training room was tranquil. There were no sounds of punches, no voices calling out names, and no background warm-up music. It was just Jay and Malik sitting on the cool tile floor, flipping through the folders from Dr. Carter, each sheet of paper feeling heavier than any kick they had ever endured. The punching bags hung in the small garage behind their house. The ropes frayed, but everything suddenly looked like a distant past. Malik stood quietly, turned on the soft yellow light, and approached the old wooden rack. There hung an old, worn martial arts belt. Their fathers had kept a belt that had never had the chance to be worn in competition. Malik took it down, dusted it off, and then hung it on a higher hook as a silent tribute. Jay didn't ask anything, just watched and nodded gently. That night, as they prepared for bed, Malik suddenly asked, "Do you think we can do it?" Jay didn't answer right away. He looked up at the water-damaged ceiling, once full of holes where the two had lain, listening to coaches yelling at others on YouTube. Then he softly replied, "We already did, Malik. It's just that now, others are finally seeing it." There were no grand goodbyes the day Jay and Malik boarded the bus to the state center. No balloons, no banners. But as the bus pulled away from their small street on the other side of the road, Coach Blake stood leaning against a lamppost, hands in his pockets, eyes no longer avoiding theirs. Just a brief look, silent, but enough for Jay to understand some apologies never need to be spoken. Behind him, Cole stood beside his bicycle, still wearing his old GI. He gave one short nod and turned away. No one came closer, no one waved, but everyone watched. No one called the brothers janitors anymore, and there were no more looks of disdain. But there were no loud praises either, because accurate recognition doesn't need noise, it only needs eyes that truly see.